The American Old West is a time shrouded in equal parts legend and reality, a rugged era of cowboys, outlaws, pioneers, and gold rush dreams. But behind the shootouts and saloon doors lies a tapestry of fascinating, unexpected truths that shape this iconic chapter of history. From surprising innovations to cultural quirks and larger-than-life personalities, the Wild West was far more than dusty trails and six-shooters. Saddle up as we uncover 20 compelling facts that reveal the untamed spirit of the Old West in all its gritty, unpredictable glory. The first quick-draw gunfight occurred in Springfield, Missouri. The famous encounter between Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt stemmed from a disagreement over gambling debts. Tutt, a well-known figure in the local gambling scene, had been supporting other gamblers financially, hoping to drive Hickok into significant losses and push him out of town. However, Hickok managed to come out ahead, intensifying tensions between the two. Their rivalry took a more personal turn when Tutt insisted Hickok owed him $40 from a previous transaction involving a horse. Hickok, according to historian Tom Clavin in Wild Bill, the true story of the American frontier's first gunfighter, agreed to pay Tutt the $40 immediately, hoping to settle the dispute. However, Tutt unexpectedly demanded an additional $25. When Hickok declined to meet this new demand, Tutt escalated matters by seizing Hickok's pocket watch from the gambling table, a bold and provocative move. The next day, July 21, 1865, in the relatively young town of Springfield, Missouri, which was just over 3 decades old, Tutt publicly displayed the watch in the town square. This act was not only an insult to Hickok, but also a challenge to his reputation. Hickok reportedly tried to resolve the issue amicably, urging Tutt to return the watch and avoid further conflict. Tutt, however, remained defiant, refusing to back down. By late afternoon, tensions reached their peak. Hickok cautioned Tutt against crossing the square while openly displaying the watch, as it could be seen as a direct affront. The two men stood their ground, each prepared to assert his position. At a critical moment, both reached for their firearms, and after a brief standoff, a single shot ended the confrontation. This event, widely regarded as the first recorded instance of a public quick-draw duel, quickly captured the public's imagination. News of the incident spread rapidly, and just 2 years later, an illustration depicting the encounter appeared in Harper's New Monthly magazine, cementing the story as a cornerstone of Old West lore. It marked the beginning of Hickok's rise as a legendary figure in frontier history. Cowboy meant criminal. In the Old West, particularly in regions like Arizona, the term cowboy often carried a negative connotation. Rather than the heroic ranch hands we imagine today, cowboys were frequently associated with criminal activity. An 1881 editorial in the San Francisco Examiner described them as the most reckless class of outlaws in that wild country, claiming they were infinitely worse than the ordinary robber. This reflects how the term was used at the time to refer to lawless individuals rather than hardworking cattle herders. One of the most infamous groups tied to this perception was a gang known simply as the Cowboys, who operated in and around Tombstone, Arizona. Their activities contributed to the term's reputation as synonymous with outlaw behavior. The Wild Bunch, another notorious gang, further cemented the idea of outlaws in the Old West. A famous photograph captures members of the gang, including Kid Curry, Bill McCarty, Bill Todd Carver, Ben Kilpatrick, and Tom O'Day, showcasing the individuals behind some of the era's most audacious crimes. Millions of bison were slaughtered. In the early 19th century, vast herds of bison, numbering between 10 and 30 million, roamed freely across the American plains. By the early 20th century, their population had plummeted to fewer than 1,000. This dramatic decline was the result of targeted efforts to eliminate the species, driven by a combination of governmental policies and individual actions. The bison held profound significance for Native American communities, serving as a vital source of food, clothing, and shelter. Recognizing this, the United States government began efforts to decimate bison populations starting in the 1830s, viewing it as a means of undermining indigenous ways of life. A U.S. Army colonel famously remarked during a hunting expedition that every buffalo gone is an Indian gone, highlighting the strategic intent behind these actions. Notable individuals, including Buffalo Bill Cody, played a role in this effort. Cody reportedly hunted approximately 4,000 bison over 2 years, a staggering figure that contributed to the species' decline. By 1889, only 256 bison remained in captivity, marking the lowest point for their population. Conservation efforts in the 20th century helped to revive the bison population. Today, numbers have risen to an estimated 150,000 to 200,000. For those wishing to witness these majestic creatures in their natural habitat, Yellowstone National Park offers a glimpse of the once mighty herds that defined the American frontier. Cowboys didn't wear 10-gallon hats. In the Old West, hats were an essential part of daily life, especially for those working outdoors. However, the iconic 10-gallon hat, often associated with cowboys, wasn't a staple of the era. That style became popularized much later, in the 1920s, largely due to Hollywood's romanticized portrayals of the frontier. Instead, most cowboys, as well as ranchers, farmers, and workers in other professions, favored a practical flat-brimmed Stetson known as the Boss of the Plains. This design was created by John Stetson, who recognized that the hats commonly worn on the plains were ill-suited to the region's demanding climate. Straw, silk, fur, and wool hats were either too hot during summer or retained water during rainy seasons, making them ineffective for outdoor work. The Boss of the Plains addressed these challenges. Lightweight, waterproof, and durable, it quickly became indispensable. Its interior was sturdy enough to double as a water bucket for a horse, while its wide brim offered crucial protection from the sun and rain. This combination of practicality and comfort made it a favorite among Westerners. Priced at $4.50, a significant amount at the time, equivalent to roughly $74 today, the hats were crafted from nutria fur for added durability. A photograph from 1883 of the Dodge City Peace Commission captures several members wearing these iconic hats, a testament to their widespread use and enduring legacy in the history of the American West. Gun control was stricter back then. When picturing the Old West, it's easy to imagine saloons filled with patrons sporting six-shooters on their hips and 1873 Winchesters tucked under their pillows. However, this image doesn't reflect the reality in many frontier towns. In places like Deadwood, Dodge City, Abilene, and Tombstone, strict gun control laws were often enforced. Carrying firearms within town limits was generally prohibited to maintain order and reduce the likelihood of violence. Visitors were required to check their weapons with the local sheriff, who would issue a token in return. This system functioned much like a coat check, but for guns. Residents of these towns were granted some leeway. While they couldn't carry firearms in public spaces, they were allowed to keep them securely in their homes. These regulations highlight the efforts many communities made to create a safer environment amid the challenges of frontier life. You could see famous gunmen perform for shows. Imagine attending a stage performance in New York City where Buffalo Bill Cody and Wild Bill Hickok regale the audience with exaggerated tales around a campfire. That's exactly what took place during the height of Buffalo Bill's fame. Cody created a traveling exhibition called Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show, which featured a variety of performers, with Hickok being one of the most notable stars. The show wasn't limited to traditional stage performances. Cody also staged dramatic buffalo hunts and reenacted famous events, such as stagecoach robberies, to captivate his audience. In 1902, he even organized a grand parade, and a video of the event can be found in the Library of Congress. For those interested in experiencing a piece of Buffalo Bill's legacy firsthand, the Buffalo Bill Museum, engraved in Golden, Colorado, offers an opportunity to learn more about this iconic figure from the Wild West. Dead outlaws were propped up and photographed. The stories of notorious outlaws and criminal gangs were widely reported in newspapers across the country, often embellished in books of the time. When these outlaws met their end, often in dramatic fashion, local communities sought tangible evidence, while authorities used the deaths as a grim reminder of the consequences awaiting those who turned to crime. With the advent of photography in the early 19th century, there was finally a way to capture these moments for both proof and deterrence. The bodies of slain outlaws were often displayed publicly, sometimes with entire gangs arranged together, or a pair of individuals propped up for a final photograph. These images served as both a morbid spectacle for townsfolk and a stark warning for any potential wrongdoers before the bodies were buried. The first train robbery occurred in Indiana. The first recorded robbery on a moving train took place on October 6, 1866, carried out by the infamous Reno Gang. This event is considered one of the most remarkable heists in history. The gang boarded the train and forced the messenger, who was responsible for the safe keys, to open one of the safes. Inside, they discovered $18,000 in cash, along with jewelry and other valuables, all of which they seized. However, the gang encountered a problem with the larger safe, as it lacked a key. In an attempt to steal it, they decided to throw it off the moving train, hoping to recover it during their escape. Unfortunately, the safe was too heavy to carry off, and the gang was forced to leave it behind. 2 years later, in 1868, 6 members of the Reno Gang were captured and executed. This occurred at a location that would later become known as Hangman Crossing, near Seymour, Indiana, where they were buried. The graves of these outlaws can still be visited today, though they are now enclosed behind a small gate. Whiskey was terrible. Imagine walking into a saloon, taking a seat at the bar, and ordering the finest whiskey the bartender has to offer. After taking a sip, you're left choking. This stuff tastes like gasoline, but the label proudly claims it's been aged for 10 years and hails from Kentucky. What's going on? During the Old West era, copyright and trademark laws were loosely enforced, if at all. Since these were frontier towns, there was little oversight, and many producers took advantage of the lack of regulation. In fact, much of the whiskey being sold might have been diluted with water or mixed with cheaper spirits to boost profits. Some bourbons were even distilled from low-quality molasses, according to Serious Eats. The whiskey in circulation was notorious for its potency, and it earned several colorful nicknames. Terms like coffin varnish, mountain howitzer, and tangle leg were used to describe alcohol so strong that it could leave a person stumbling out of the bar, struggling to walk straight. Want to dine like the Wild West? It's probably no surprise that food in the Wild West was often quite basic and unappetizing. Breakfast could be an exception, featuring dishes like cornbread, stew, boiled eggs, fried potatoes, and omelets, which were fairly hearty and enjoyable. However, dinner might not be as appealing, with options like calf's head, boiled mutton, or pickled calf's feet. For dessert, you might find a simple pudding. These meals were typical for a frontier family in the mid-19th centuries. Cooking methods were rudimentary, relying on basic tools such as ovens, frying pans, and roasting spits. The available ingredients were limited to what could be sourced locally and what was in season, meaning the menu often depended on the time of year. Cowboys, in particular, had a much more limited diet. Their meals typically consisted of canned beans, tough biscuits, dried meat, dried fruit, and plenty of coffee. If you're interested in experiencing a mix of modern food and some historic Old West charm, the Buckhorn Saloon and Museum in San Antonio, Texas, offers a unique combination of both. The first armed bank robbery occurred in Massachusetts. The first recorded bank robbery didn't take place in the Old West, but rather in 1831, almost 30 years before the iconic era. However, this early robbery involved the use of forged keys, and no firearms were used. The first violent, non-war-related bank robbery occurred later, in 1863, in Malden, Massachusetts. This dramatic event unfolded at noon on December 15th, when Edward Green, a 32-year-old postmaster in the town, entered Malden Bank under the pretense of requesting change. Green was heavily in debt and struggling with alcohol. In what he thought was an opportunity to escape his financial troubles, he noticed that only one person was working in the bank at the time, a 17-year-old boy, the son of the bank's president. Green left the bank, went home to retrieve a gun, and returned to shoot the young man in the head. He then took $5,000 in cash, equivalent to more than $105,000 today. Green's actions quickly raised suspicion. Locals noticed that the previously debt-ridden postmaster was now able to pay off his obligations. About a month later, Green reportedly confessed to the crime, and he was hanged in 1866. His execution marked him as the first person in the U.S. to be hanged for committing an armed bank robbery. The famous OK Corral shootout wasn't much of a shootout. While the OK Corral gunfight in Tombstone, Arizona, is one of the most famous events of the Old West, it was over in less than 30 seconds, with 3 deaths and 3 injuries. On one side were the Earp brothers, Wyatt, Morgan, and Virgil, along with Doc Holliday. Facing them were members of the cowboy gang, including Ike and Billy Clanton, Tom and Frank McLaury, and Billy Claiborne. Only 3 of the cowboys were armed. The identity of the first shooter remains unclear, but what is known is that the entire confrontation was brief and intense, involving just 30 seconds and 30 shots. Virgil Earp hit Ike Clanton in the chest, Doc Holliday fired a shotgun blast that struck Tom McLaury, and Wyatt Earp fatally wounded Frank McLaury. Clanton and Claiborne, unarmed and unharmed, fled the scene. Afterward, the Earps and Holliday were charged with murder, and the trial became a spectacle, with witnesses on both sides offering conflicting testimony. Supporters of the Cowboys blamed the lawmen for the violence, while the Earps' allies defended their actions. Ultimately, the judge ruled in favor of the Earps and Holliday, acquitting them of all charges. Today, visitors to modern-day Tombstone can witness a reenactment of the iconic shootout, which takes place 3 times daily. You can also explore Wyatt Earp's boyhood home in Pella, Iowa, for a deeper look into his early years. The deadliest outlaw was John Wesley Hardin. John Wesley Hardin, born in Bonham, Texas, became infamous for his violent actions at a very young age. At just 14 years old, he was involved in a stabbing incident with a fellow student, almost resulting in the student's death. By the age of 15, Hardin had already killed his uncle's slave and shot 3 soldiers who were chasing him. In his autobiography, Hardin boasted of having killed 44 men, but many of these claims are difficult to verify and likely exaggerated. However, historians believe that he did in fact kill a significant number of people, possibly as many as 30. His life was filled with a string of violent episodes, many of which seemed to occur one after the other. In Abilene, Kansas, Hardin crossed paths with Wild Bill Hickok, who was serving as the town marshal at the time. Surprisingly, the two seemed to get along, and it's unclear whether Hickok knew of Hardin's criminal past or simply ignored it. One of the most notorious incidents in Hardin's life took place on August 6, 1871, when he was staying in a hotel. Disturbed by the loud snoring of the man in the room next to his, Hardin, who was intoxicated, fired a gun through the wall. It's uncertain whether Hardin intended to kill the man, but the bullet struck the stranger in the heart. This incident later became the basis for the story that Hardin had killed a man just for snoring too loudly. After the shooting, Hardin fled and managed to avoid capture until 1875, when he was arrested for killing a well-known sheriff in Comanche, Texas. At the age of 21, Hardin was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but was released after serving 17 years, having been pardoned in 1894. Sadly, in 1895, just a year after his release, Hardin was shot and killed by a man with whom he had earlier had a confrontation. The man shot Hardin in the back of the head while he was playing dice, and then fired several more shots to ensure he was dead. Women were welcome in saloons. In the 1800s, it was rare for women to be seen drinking in bars, especially in the eastern parts of the United States, where more traditional and Puritan values prevailed. However, as you moved westward, the social norms began to loosen. In these frontier towns, women could often be found mingling with the men in saloons. Some of these women were likely to be prostitutes, or what were known as painted ladies, who frequented the more rundown bars seeking clients. Others worked as dance hall girls, serving as entertainers and hostesses. These women would sing, dance, and engage in conversation with the men to keep the mood lively and encourage patrons to spend more money at the bar. As noted by Legends of America, saloon girls in the late 1800s could earn around $10 a week, which would be equivalent to about $205 in 1870s money. In addition to their regular pay, they often received commissions on the drinks they sold, making the job a potentially lucrative, though often difficult, occupation. Mining towns were more expensive than living in Silicon Valley today. The California gold rush sparked a massive migration to the hills, leading to the rapid establishment of mining camps in towns. This influx of people created an overwhelming demand for goods, which caused prices to skyrocket and, in many cases, led to severe price gouging. In fact, living in some of these towns was more expensive than it is in modern-day Silicon Valley. To put this into perspective, here's what you could expect to pay in 1851 in California's mining towns. A single egg could set you back as much as $3, which would be around $105 today. A pound of butter could cost $20, the equivalent of about $700 in today's money. Gold pans, which had previously sold for just 20 cents, now went for $8, or about $280 today. Shovels, which were once reasonably priced, could now be found for $36, about $1,259 in today's terms. Despite these steep costs, most miners were only finding between $10 and $15 worth of gold per day, making it difficult for them to keep up with the rising expenses in these booming towns. Dead man's hand. In poker, a hand made up of two aces and two eights is known as a dead man's hand. This infamous term originates from the cards that Wild Bill Hickok was reportedly holding when he was fatally shot by Jack McCall in Deadwood. According to the story, both pairs were of the black suits, aces of spades and eights of clubs. McCall was eventually arrested and hanged for his actions, and his trial became a widely publicized event. Today, visitors to Deadwood can see the chair where Hickok was sitting at the time of his death, which is displayed at the saloon number 10, offering a glimpse into a pivotal moment in Old West history. Black Bart, outlaw, robbed with style. Among the many notorious outlaws of the Old West, Charles Bowles, better known by his alias Black Bart, stands out for his unusual methods and his lasting legacy. Unlike many of his contemporaries who resorted to violence, Bowles made a name for himself as a stagecoach robber with a unique flair. Between 1875 and 1883, he successfully robbed 28 stagecoaches, all owned by Wells Fargo. His signature look included a flour sack mask with eye holes, a black derby hat, and a gun. His approach was simple yet effective. He would demand that the driver drop the lockbox while standing boldly in the middle of the road. Bowles wasn't alone in his heists, as he had a hidden crew positioned nearby. On one occasion, he even threatened the driver with a gunfight if the man refused to comply. When the driver saw guns pointed from the bushes, he had no choice but to surrender the lockbox, allowing Bowles to escape with the valuables. Incredibly, Black Bart left behind poetic notes for law enforcement to find after each robbery. One of his most famous verses read, "I've labored long and hard for bread, for honor, and for riches, but on my corns too long you've tread, you fine-haired sons of..." Despite his criminal exploits, Bowles managed to elude capture for a time, eventually being caught and serving 6 years in prison. After his release, however, he disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a mysterious legacy and a curious chapter in the history of Old West outlaws. Calamity Jane was buried next to Wild Bill Hickok. Calamity Jane was a vibrant and often exaggerated figure of the Old West, known for spinning countless stories about her life, some of which may or may not have included participating in battles with Native American groups. What is certain, however, is that Jane crossed paths with Wild Bill Hickok during a wagon train journey to Deadwood, where the two became acquainted. There's debate over whether Hickok had any genuine affection for Jane. Some accounts suggest that he had little regard for her, and that the decision to bury her beside him at Mount Moriah Cemetery in Deadwood was meant as a prank. Other theories propose that it was either Jane's final wish or a strategic move by local business owners, who saw the duo's connection as a way to attract visitors. Regardless of the reason, their graves can still be visited at Mount Moriah Cemetery today. Poker Alice made her fortune playing cards. Gambling in the Old West was predominantly a male-dominated activity, but women were certainly not excluded from participating, provided the establishment allowed it. One such woman who gained notoriety for her poker skills was Alice Ivers Tubbs, famously known as Poker Alice. Born in England in 1851, Alice immigrated to the United States and became an accomplished gambler. She learned the art of poker from her first husband, honing her skills in various saloons across the West. Alice's distinctive combination of beauty, intelligence, and elegance made her a standout figure at the poker tables. She was well-dressed, educated, and had a preference for smoking cigars, traits that were unusual for women in that era, but added to her mystique. Alice was also known for carrying a .38 revolver and once shot a miner in the arm after he threatened her future husband. Her reputation was built not only on her gambling prowess, but also on her ability to stand her ground when necessary. Later in life, Alice opened her own saloon during Prohibition, a testament to her entrepreneurial spirit. In one notable incident, she shot and killed a soldier who was wreaking havoc in her saloon, but she was acquitted after it was ruled she acted in self-defense. Throughout her career, Alice claimed to have won around $250,000 from gambling, a considerable sum at the time. She lived a long life, passing away at the age of 79 in Rapid City, South Dakota, leaving behind a fascinating legacy as one of the few women to thrive in the world of Old West gambling. Many brands from the Wild West still exist. If you found yourself in the Old West and happened upon a well-stocked general store, you might be surprised to see some familiar brands. These early pioneers of commerce were already well established by the time the Old West era was in full swing. For example, Quaker Oats, known for its wholesome oats, was already a trusted name. Similarly, Royal Baking Powder was on shelves, making baking a little easier for home cooks. Baker's Chocolate, another familiar name, helped people enjoy rich homemade desserts. Other notable brands included Durkee, which provided a variety of spices and seasonings, and Arm & Hammer, whose baking soda was used for a wide range of household purposes. Fleischmann's yeast, a staple for bakers, and Pillsbury flour, which was essential for many cooking and baking needs, were also available. As we've seen, the American Old West is full of captivating stories, fascinating figures, and surprising facts that continue to spark our imagination. From daring outlaws to legendary lawmen, the Wild West is much more than just a chapter in history. It's a timeless adventure. If you enjoyed these intriguing glimpses into the past, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more exciting tales from the Wild West. Join us as we continue to explore the untamed history of America's frontier.